Emilia, thank you so much for joining us on the Heart Healing podcast. It's such an honor to have you here today, all the way from Helsinki.
So lovely to be here.
So your book is deeply personal. Could you share your journey through burnout, love, addiction, and heartbreak, and how it led you to do this work?
So 1 hour monologue we're starting. Yeah. So it all started, I would say it started from the heartbreak. It's already 12 years ago. And the interesting thing was that I had been married, but after the divorce, I wasn't feeling that bad. But then I had a short rebound relationship that totally broke my heart. And before that, I had been very healthy. And suddenly I was suffering from all kind of symptoms, from debilitating back pains to sleep problems, eventually panic attacks. And I was thinking, what's going on? And how can losing love make me so sick? So that actually took me then to the path of studying love hormones. So because I'm a medical doctor, so it was kind of a natural way to dive deep into the science. And I wrote my first book already 10 years ago. And when I was writing my first book, I learned how the love hormones basically work, that, in the first state, in intense high phase of love, we have this dopamine highs and we have serotonin lows. And it's a great state. It feels good, but it's very energy consuming. And then that usually lasts in average 1.5 years. And after that, we enter a different state of neurochemical balance, the attachment phase of love. And there we have these 3 hormones, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, in a very nice balanced state. And my question was that how could I get there without a relationship? Because actually in the part of the journey is that I started to medicate my pain with relationships. So I became addicted to love. So that's why I wanted to know how to get there, but without a relationship. And I did get there, but it took some years and lots of inner work that we're probably going to talk today. And I felt that I kind of cracked the code.
Yeah, cracking the code, which is a huge accomplishment, I think, for listeners. It's like, oh my God, if only I could get there. I think lots of people think of hormones in relation to their physical health more, but you show that actually they're more related to our emotional and mental well-being as well. Why is that connection so often overlooked, do you think?
Well, the thing is that I was already kind of having a hard time in medical school when everything was separated. We were taught about the endocrine system and nervous system and heart and lungs and whatever, but everything was separate. And now when I think so, you can't separate the mind from the body. It's just a fact. It's not even a mind-body connection. It's mind-body unity. But this is kind of the new wave of the science that we're, starting to realize that that's just how it is. And if I'm looking at my own story, so let's say when I was in a very unbalanced state, so it wasn't that I was physically drained. Actually, my work wasn't draining me, but it was my mind. Because I was ruminating in the past or thinking when I have the perfect relationship, or when I have moved to a new place, or when I only have a different kind of job or whatever. So basically my thoughts were making me sick.
And I think often people don't think of things like dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins as hormones. They sort of strictly regard estrogen, progesterone, testosterone as being hormones. And I think it's something that's come into the public conversation more recently and has obviously had more awareness around it. But I still think that it's underestimated the extent to which they do play on our mind and bodies, because I know for myself, for example, for a woman, when you're having your period, or when you're maybe in that PMT sort of phase, you do feel very different mentally.
Oh my God. Yesterday, I had the last day of my PMS. I was like, I can't do this. I felt like flying back to Finland, And today, luckily my period started and I'm like I can do it. So it is a huge difference. And plus, like what people don't know is that oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine are neuromodulators, which mean that they actually modulate all these hormones. So basically, if we take a look at oxytocin, for example, so under oxytocin, we have insulin, thyroid hormones, cortisol, and under those, we have also estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So all these hormones are actually interconnected. And basically, I'm 46 now, so in the middle of perimenopause, so extremely interested in this world as well. But what I have realized is that if you want to work on your female hormones, you always start with actually the love hormones. And this is why actually the new book, kind of the work that I try to be advised there. So I feel that that is the work we all should do when we are in the middle of perimenopause, or that's kind of the pause there that is telling that, hey, it's start pausing and asking some questions and doing the changes in your life.
So what are the love hormones? And yeah, we're going to go into them in more detail, but what role generally does each one play?
Well, so the first one, dopamine, is the hormone of motivation, anticipation. It's called the hormone of reward. In my book, I have actually named it as the hormone of direction, because when I was kind of diving deep into the science, but combining it with ancient wisdom, I started to see the kind of deeper meaning of dopamine. That the story, for example, I was telling you that I had lost the love of my life and I was heartbreaking and having these symptoms. But the truth is that if I'm now looking back, so I had lost my direction in life, and I was trying to crap on other people's paths and kind of look also purpose from other people. So, and that eventually wasn't working. It was just taking me further and further from my own calling and path. So I really needed to, I actually did end up in very dark places. And I was feeling so bad, and I was in such a dark, horrible situation in my life that I was kind of crying help, and I felt that now things need to change, and I started to meditate and kind of see the light. And then I found out that, and then I kind of figured out that I need to be more honest to myself and start doing things that bring me joy. And those things then eventually gave me the energy to start writing books, and through that energy I found back to my path, where now I feel that, okay, there's actually purpose in each step I'm taking, and that kind of gives that sustainable flow of dopamine. And when we think about addiction and dopamine, so they're very closely intertwined. And if I'm using my own story as an example, so when the relationship ended that I was kind of still madly in love, so there's a huge drop in the dopamine baseline. And the dopamine baseline is basically the state where, the level of dopamine we have in our system when there's nothing special going on in our day. And if there's a drop in that baseline, we will feel anxious, kind of empty, restless. And that's the state where we also become very prone to addiction, because that's when we kind of have that urge to just take something to, to mitigate the pain, which might be alcohol or shopping or scrolling Tinder or Instagram. In my case, it was romantic love, because I noticed that the high that the relationship we're creating was actually the only thing for me that actually masked the pain. And I felt like, okay, I have purpose, I found somebody. But that was also because that was the story that I had been telling myself since I was a kid, that romantic love is the highest prize in life. That's kind of, for me, it never was education. It was never job. It was always finding my true soulmate, the true love, to have the perfect story. And when that didn't work out well, so it was for me, that was a traumatic experience. And like Dr. Kaburmadev beautifully puts that there's a fine line before addiction and passion. And addiction consumes while passion creates. And for me, the relationship, they really started to consume and drain my energy. And that's why I was starting to have all these symptoms.
It did strike me when I was reading your work that actually addicts often find falling in love virtually impossible. What can you elaborate on that? Because there's not really any space if you're addicted to another substance. That was as far as I understood. Like if you're giving into another addiction, that actually it can be very, very hard to fall in love and get that dopamine.
Well, there's actually research that, for example, these days when young generation, they are spending so much time in social media that, you know, you're getting that all the dopamine hits from there. So you don't really need it anymore from relationship. But then again, you know, I'm sharing about my own love addiction. So basically, then again, love was the drug for me. And I know also a lot of people that do have other addictive behavior and also are kind of looking that high from love. Because that's basically, these are all, of course, generalizations, but we are roughly divided in dopamine dominant and serotonin dominant people. I'm highly dopamine dominant, which is, I've always been very competitive. I used to be a sprinter. I love sports. I love winning. I love risks. I love novelty. I always thought that serotonin is the super boring hormone until I learned that dopamine can thrive without a well-functioning serotonin system. So basically, serotonin is the counterpart, that before I started working on my serotonin levels, my dopamine would just take over. So I was like almost hypomanic. I was just having like tons of projects at the same time and just like so many ideas and very difficult to focus on just one thing. And now if we jump into serotonin, so I have named it as the molecule of safety. Serotonin it's about being valued. It's about feeling you're worthy, and that you kind of feel safe. And the thing for me was that I had lots of unconscious fears that I wasn't aware. So I was actually terribly afraid of being left alone, which made me then, kind of hang on these relationships like a life rope. And I also had a fear of failure that I think it was just 2 years ago when I actually figured out that I actually did have that, because I was doing some EFT tapping. I don't know if listeners are familiar with this technique where we tap certain acupressure points, and while we are repeating, let's say, something that is bothering us, like I'm not good enough to do this podcast or whatever, and then you keep doing it. It's basically like reprogramming your nervous system so it will learn that it's actually safe to do this podcast. So it was extremely beneficial when I was having still these panic attacks, and I was able to teach my nervous system that there's nothing to be afraid, and I actually can do this. So with EFT tapping, I was able to, because what happens with EFT tapping is that you might start with one sentence, and then it might kind of take you on a trip. And for me, it happened that I was doing tapping for something very just basic stuff, that I'm anxious. And then suddenly I just had this kind of memory or vision from my childhood, very kind of nothing special. It was a moment that I was going to school. I was first grader, but I missed the taxi. And for me, it was so humiliating that I just panicked, and I decided never to go to school. And my parents, I didn't tell anybody. So my parents and the teachers and psychologists, they were all like, what happened? They thought I had some huge trauma. But that was that little moment that for that little girl was just too much. So that probably, it might be that was kind of one of those moments that made me start to overcompensate, to not fail in a way that, that I was carrying this. I have to, I still might have that feeling like yesterday that I can't do this. I can't do it. Even I know I can. And these days I don't have the pressure because I'm like, well, if I can't, it's not the end of the world anyway. But basically, the point being that when you work on your serotonin system, you start building inner safety. And instead of looking for other people's acceptance and approval, you start having the feeling that I'm worthy and the only person I need to make proud is actually myself. So these were all these areas that I was working, and I hope other people are working as well, to build a strong serotonin system. I call it a system, as it's not just eat tryptophan or serotonin boosting foods. And these boosting tips are great, but I must say that when I was super unbalanced, I was boosting my hormones like crazy. I was doing cold water exposure, I was doing sauna, massages, eating healthy, everything, but it wasn't really healing me. So I mean, like, boosting is a great tool, but the healing comes from this inner work.
Yeah, and besides EFT, it sounds as though you're tapping into that sort of rest and digest system, and it's more engaged with the parasympathetic nervous system than the sympathetic nervous system, serotonin. Is that right?
Yeah. So how it goes basically is that when we are under the fight and flight mode, so that's the stress mode. So basically then the stress hormones are taking over. And
being cortisol, adrenaline,
yeah,
and then presumably dopamine as well.
But I would say that it's not always that simple. Sometimes we might be kind of still have dopamine and still be kind of rest and digesting. But in a nutshell, if I'm trying to kind of simplify, so stress hormones almost always, if they are heightened for a prolonged period of time, they start eating a lot of hormones and sex hormones. So that's kind of what's happening. And let's say if we take a look at serotonin and stress. So for example, if there's a traumatic experience, so first there's a kind of big spike in serotonin. But then if that situation goes on and becomes chronical, so actually the serotonin base levels start to decrease. And that's how kind of trauma and stress increases anxiety and depression and all that. That's kind of the path. And same actually with oxytocin that we haven't yet touched on. So it's same with oxytocin. So if there's trauma, let's say childhood neglect, abuse, so it causes drops in the base level, the oxytocin base levels. And what oxytocin does, it's actually the hormone of connection. So it's very important when we think about feeling empathy or actually having kind of social trust and the feeling of bonding. And that's kind of a tricky, because if you think that I have a traumatic experience, like I did, I like using myself as an example, because then I at least know that, this is true. So then, let's say my oxytocin levels drop. So I start feeling isolated, and I start feeling like disconnected. And, I used to be very social, and I had an easy time connecting with people. And suddenly I have panic attacks when I'm surrounded by people. So it's very difficult, because you start fearing like human connection. And that's actually the thing that would actually heal you. So this is kind of the challenging part after, when we are kind of recovering from a challenging experience, or you might call it traumatic event or whatever. So how to build that trust again. So sometimes you might start with baby steps with, like, let's say breathing exercises, maybe some yoga nidra. I don't know if you're familiar, you're probably familiar with yoga nidra. So it's a non-sleep deep rest practice. Just 20 minutes gives you a really great deep rest worth of 2 hours of deep sleep. And that's also very good, like bringing yourself back to your true self, which is like, where the serotonin and oxytocin levels are kind of built. So for example, for me, that was very great practice. Also meditation, amazing, because it helps connect with ourselves, and that's kind of the source origin for oxytocin. So in my book, I think the key message when it comes to oxytocin is that we are giving these boosting tips. It's like hug your pet and have a nice massage and look at your partner in the eyes and take a warm bath. I was doing all that. But as I was not connected to myself, it wasn't working. I would get a little spike, but it wasn't sustainable. So in order to really the oxytocin to flow in a sustainable way, I needed to start embracing boredom, start kind of give that space, or like actually realize that I'm not my thoughts, and meditation helped with that. I did also some holotropic breathing and like lots of other exercises that were very important. But it was crazy because then I had always thought that I will never be that person that can be like calm and just stare at some sky and trees. And no, I'm actually that one. So it was like, it felt so good when suddenly you're able to enjoy the little moments in life, and you just wake up with full gratitude and this kind of different kind of peace. And then when it comes to work, so when I was unbalanced, so I was starting companies and flying around the world and pitching this and that, and still things weren't kind of really something would always happen that they didn't go, they didn't then eventually happen. And now I felt that when I got these love hormones in a sustainable balance, so like magic entered my life. It was crazy because all my dreams just happened. Like even the craziest dreams. I had to dream about like acting, and I was 41 and I got the lead role in a romantic comedy, which became like a critically acclaimed series. I was like, this can't be true. I got the publishing deal with Penguin Random House UK, which was like insane because I come from Finland and it had never happened and nobody thought it would be possible. And that all happened without pushing. Just by doing the inner work and kind of course, then I had the goals and, of course, I in the book, I advise how to do the dopamine work, which is like, I have written these goals on a piece of paper. I have felt how they feel in my body. So I prepared myself. So how they say that, luck favors preparation. So I definitely have done that. But then it was also just letting go and trusting. And I feel that now there's a very nice balance. I have 2 kids that I actually, there's no pushing and the feeling of hurry, that I have time to hang out and be home with them. And still things are happening, which feels great.
It strikes me as you're speaking that it's so ironic that we're so driven by this dopamine seeking sort of flurry, we almost go into this haze as humans and we think it's like go, go, go. And I think we're learning more and more about the need to actually take our foot off the accelerator, the importance of actually realigning our systems. But very few people, as you've done in this book, have actually spoken about the importance of the serotonin and the oxytocin, because I think so often we don't really understand why. Well, yeah, we have to regulate our nervous system, and if you're in a space of dysregulation, then clearly things are out of whack. But it's really fascinating just understanding the true extent to which oxytocin and serotonin play such a key role. How, going back to the dopamine, so how did you start to regulate that desire for the dopamine hits? I mean, how can you get it in a more sustainable way if you're an alpha personality and highly driven?
So, well, I kind of did the work parallelly. I started with joy because I realized that when I was practicing medicine in Finland, and I suddenly realized that my days they didn't feel purposeful. And it was kind of ironic because I was a medical doctor, and doctors are supposed to heal people, and that's supposed to be a very purposeful profession. But I felt that I wasn't using my superpower. So if I think me as a kid, so I loved to entertain people, I loved sports, I loved being on the stage, I loved to do creative stuff. I actually also loved building little businesses and selling. And as a doctor, I wasn't able to use any of those superpowers. And for me, actually, it started from a moment that my good friends, they were starting a basketball team in Helsinki. And they asked, like, would you like to be part of it? Maybe a team doctor and a co-owner. And I was like, oh, it felt like so cool. It was like pure joy. And I didn't even think about it as a purposeful thing. But the thing is that with joy, when I started, then we started building that team, it gave me so much energy that it kind of, I felt that I was getting closer to my true self. And with that energy, I actually started writing my first book. So in a way that it was like being a part of basketball team for me, that actually was that probably first step. And by the way, we are now the Finnish championships. And it like, so it was a pretty cool story as well. And, but many times when people ask, I'm just like, listen to joy, that what gives you energy? It can be like playing guitar or baking or charity or whatever, but try to do more of that, because we underestimate kind of the just simple power of pure joy, because that's the thing that gives us the energy that we can then use to walk towards our purpose. Because, for example, when I was my love addiction took me to some dark places and to these kind of a very bad relationships that kind of drained all my energy and were kind of very abusive. So to get out from these places, you need energy. And especially if somebody who's listening to this is at the situation, it must be also a work environment, but something that is really training your energy. So it's just like, try to do something that gives you energy. It can be a hobby, or just like listen to your favorite songs or sport or whatever. And also sometimes I advise that write a list about the things that these things give me energy and these things drain my energy. And then just try to do more the things that you're, that are on the first list, and then less the later ones, because that will help you to kind of go to your path. Because most of the times why we are not walking where we should, it's either the fear, the limiting beliefs that are blocking us, or that there are things that are draining our energy. It might be like relationships, work, or whatever. And that's why I also like building boundaries. I come from a family where, like, very loving family. Like, I had a beautiful childhood, but no boundaries. Like, so that's why I overshare, like here now. I overshare, like, in a work, when there's new people, I always like, it's really hard for me, for example, to be a boss, because I always become a best friend, and then I'm like, oh, this is not a really sustainable way of working, and I always do it, and it's still something I'm trying to work on, to put work boundaries. But also in my personal life, it was my mother was diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago, and that was the moment where I noticed that there were no boundaries in our family. So we were all breathing that same pain. And with my sister, luckily she's we're on the same page, and she's a energy healer and very smart, wise woman. So we were like, hey, we can't go on like this, that we need to start putting some boundaries, or we're all going to be sick soon. Because nobody was sleeping, and we were all just like panicking for a year. So that was actually a time that I had to learn how to build those boundaries. And I was doing all kind of somatic practices. Actually, dance therapy was highly beneficial for me. I wasn't expecting it, but I was doing a practice with a coach, and she took me kind of this where we were using fire element to build boundaries. And I thought, this will never work, but I kind of went into the space and closed my eyes, and I was moving and building this kind of almost like fences around me. Not fences, because it was more of not that solid. But I started crying when the music stopped, because I felt like, okay, now I have boundaries. Like, now I have them. And at the same time, I was also doing work with, I think one great tool is, I said, like, every fuck this shit is an opportunity. Because at that time, there was a lot of things that were triggering me. So my there were some people that were saying stuff that were hurting. This was like these old exes or whatever, toxic people. So I noticed that actually, as long as they hurt me, there's still part of me that believes that this is true. So I was doing a lot of, for example, this EFT tapping on that stuff. So I advise people also to listen that, you know, when you have that feeling that something triggers you and you feel angry. So what's actually the feeling behind? Because it was same, like, I think it was 3 years ago. This is actually now a little bit more of the premenopause stuff. But so I think I was like 41. Yeah. And I remember when I was a kid and I was like 15 and my mom was driving me to dance practice or tennis practice or somewhere. And he was like screaming. She was screaming like a crazy person. And I remember that I got so hurt. And it was like, I remember thinking that when I have kids, I will never do that. And when my daughter was 10 years old, I got this birthday card saying like, Mom is the best mom because she's always happy and she never yells. And I was like, oh, I made it. But then I'm 41. I'm driving her to dance practice. She's 15. And I'm screaming like a crazy person. And I can't control my head. And it's horrible. And I'm feeling that I'm betraying myself and her and everybody. And then looking at this, I started to look in the science and I realized that, oh my God, that it's my progesterone levels because my mom was diagnosed with cancer. I had just gone through a divorce. I had a toddler, teenager. So the stress hormones were eating my sex hormones, which meant that progesterone is the calming hormone. So it's like hey, everything's good. So when progesterone levels get low, you get crazy. You have that rage. You can't sleep or you can't fall asleep. And luckily, I was able to medicate myself and I started taking some herbs and some bioidentical progesterone and stopped that, and also was able to explain my daughter that, you know, this is the hormones, and, you know, I wasn't able to communicate with my own mother back then. So this is kind of, a story how all these hormones are intertwined.
I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Anna Lemke's work, the author
love
of
her.
Dopamine Nation. And I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are, because she always recommends that people have at least a 30-day abstinent period of whatever their addiction is to. So for you, it would have been relationships and love. For me, it might be exercise. And I mean, obviously with food, it's much harder. But for process addictions like love, food, exercise, how do you stop yourself getting on that dopamine roller coaster, because it's so hard to step off and to find an alternative that's healthy?
Well, in a way, I understand that science, that, for example, if you have a porn addiction, so kind of going cold turkey, not watching any porn in 30 days will kind of create a new neural balance and help you with addiction. But I must say that with my own love addiction, I think it would not have worked. 30 days would not have enough. I needed to do the work with the trauma, so kind of the root cause, to be able to heal from that. Because I actually tried it, but it didn't work. So I really needed to do this work on all these three hormones. So
whilst also abstaining from love and relationships at the same time.
Well, actually, what it comes is like, once you do this work, so then you just like lose the tendency to the addictive behavior. And I wasn't expecting that. So my hypothesis when I started to do this work was like, once I get these three hormones in balance, I will have better health. But what I wasn't expecting was that actually my addictive behavior kind of just diminished. And then third, what I totally wasn't expecting was that the magic would kind of enter my life. So my hypothesis was that once I would get these love hormones in sustainable balance, I would gain my health back. And I did. But what I wasn't expecting was that actually my addictive behavior, it would just disappear. And thirdly, what I wasn't expecting was that magic would enter my life. So basically what I was telling, that all these crazy dreams would just start coming true without any pushing. So I think it was totally worth doing the work.
And I think what you say is so fascinating. And again, I think this is something that isn't so well known is that actually there's such an interaction and interplay between all the hormones. And actually, you know, as women, particularly, we focus on the estrogen and the progesterone, and particularly as women enter the perimenopause or menopause. But they don't think to really test our dopamine, our serotonin, or oxytocin levels. Can you actually do that? Can you test for dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin levels?
Not yet in a kind of way that would be very credible. We can take some, for example, tried urine test, and you can see there the metabolites, but they are not very trusty. So I would say that it's just like how I feel. That's the question you should ask. Like, when you wake up in the morning, do I feel like calm and motivated and kind of peaceful? How do you sleep? Good indicator. And yeah, so basically you start from there. And also, like, when it comes to serotonin, that am I feeling anxious, low, depressed, sad? With oxytocin, maybe that I feel isolated, disconnected, feel like I don't belong maybe anywhere. And with oxytocin, with oxytocin, how I see, because I've been, you know, doing lots of kind of different kind of work. So it's also really connects us, not just to ourselves, but also maybe the world around us. And I would call it maybe even the source energy. So when we start feeling like, hey, actually, well, I'll tell, it's easier always to tell an example. So I was on this retreat in Portugal. And there was a day that we had been doing a lot of like meditation and deep healing work. And I was sitting next to this tree, and I felt suddenly that this very strong feeling that actually the world is, you know, holding me in a way that I don't have to carry everything on my shoulders. And I moved to live by myself when I was 16 because I went to international school. I come from a farm, so it was so far that I needed to move to this town close to the village where I'm from. And of course, you know, when you're 16 and you have to take all this responsibility by yourself. So I started having lower back pains. And those pains basically followed me all my life. And they became part of my identity. I thought that, you know, I will always have them. And this retreat was just a couple of years ago. And after having this experience of such a deep, how would I say, safety and not having to carry the weight by myself. So next morning I woke up in my tent and I just felt like my spine cracking open, like, and the pain was gone. And this is once again the connection between our mind, body, and soul, I would say. And it was just game changing. And I must say that after that retreat, of course, when you come back from a retreat, so like you feel like 4 days like a Zen Buddhist, and then after a week you start yelling to your kids again. But I must say that there was something with that experience so profound that I would say like 20% of that calmness actually stayed. And even my boyfriend said that, you know, it was a good thing you went there, because I felt that I needed that experience to, if I'm saying to then kind of do that extra work to my serotonin system and oxytocin system to thrive.
Mm. It is curious to me how some of us do. I mean, obviously it is related to childhood trauma, I think, and upbringing and things, but some of us have that innate sense of safety, and other ones of us, such as myself, I have never really experienced, apart from when I actually did psilocybin, that innate sense of I am safe, that I'm okay in the world. And I think as someone who's addicted to things, you're often like looking, that's why you're so addicted to the dopamine, because you're almost looking for an escape from that lack of inner sense of safety and self. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's true. But how did you feel with that experience? Did it stay with you then, the safety, or was it? I'd
say like you, for the first 4 days when I came back, I was like, oh my God, I'm a new person. And then it slowly started to wear off. But I'd say I definitely kept, I'd say probably like 5%. It gave me a renewed sense of self. And I think it gave me a tiny bit more confidence in just being able to know who was good for me and who was not good for me, and actually being able to look at some of my friends and thinking, I think we've outgrown each other, and it's not all about me actually trying to placate you anymore. it's okay to step away from this.
Yeah, I agree. And when I'm thinking about this kind of experiences, so also I want to emphasize how important it is to take enough time for the integration, because lots of times I see people doing all kind of like heavy treatments or healing festivals where you do like 6 different kind of treatments over a weekend, and then you're just more fucked up after. So I would advise doing something that resonates with you, with a very highly qualified professional team, and then taking months to integrate it. Because the problem is that once we, let's say we do a psilocybin or holotropic breathing, and next day we jump into our normal life and work and stress and everything. So we need that time. We need at least a week, and to kind of the neural pathways to strengthen the new neural pathways we want to support, or otherwise we just slide into the back to our old reality.
That's so true. What actually happens to our hormones when we fall in love, and what's the difference between what happens to them when we're in a healthy relationship and in a toxic relationship?
Yeah. Well, scientifically speaking, the high phase of love, so when we meet somebody and we kind of crazy fall in love, so our dopamine levels kind of spike. And when the dopamine goes very up, so serotonin levels might temporarily actually crash, which the evolutionary purpose of that is to kind of have sex and be close to your partner, to serotonin and oxytocin to rise again. So there's actually meaning behind it. But these days, actually, if you meet somebody on Tinder and you dopamine levels is getting high, so then you might get very anxious because of the serotonin levels dropping, and you might even leave that guy for that, because we're not comfortable with that sense of anxiety or whatever. And also our cortisol levels, our norepinephrine levels are actually rising during this first phase of love. So basically it's pretty energy consuming. We don't need necessarily lots of food or sleep, because we're made to just reproduce. And this phase, in average, it lasts 1.5 years. And if after a 1.5 years, actually what happens also is our prefrontal cortex, so the logical thinking part, that's not working properly. So that's why we might kind of lose our mind, and we might not see the warning signs. And then after a 1.5 years, we will see the signs. And we might then realize that, okay, this is not actually good for me. Or if it's good, we enter this more balanced state of love called the attachment phase, where these 3 main love hormones, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin level, are in a very nice balanced state. And this is actually the kind of healthy, good, if we are in a good relationship, so extremely beneficial phase for our health. And this was the kind of phase that I was thinking that how will I get there without a relationship? Because as a love addict, I wasn't getting there, because the relationship would always end before the 1.5 years mark. And so basically that was and the book is the result of that question.
And in summary, how does one get there?
Well, that's the work with dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. So basically finding your direction in life, your purpose with using your superpowers, nourishing your creativity. Then doing the work with serotonin, which is facing the fears. If there is trauma, doing that, finding the safety within, so you're not looking at it from the relationship, and also building self-worth, so you're not looking for approval from the relationship. And with oxytocin, it's about creating a better connection with yourself. So you're not clinging to other people in order to get the oxytocin. Like the story I was telling is like, oh my God, my oxytocin levels are so low, I can't concentrate. I have this oxytocin deprivation, and that induces my ADD, and the only thing that can cure me is a new relationship. So that was kind of bullshit. So the thing was that I needed to actually get connected to myself to be able to just feel that that trust and safe in the world and everyday life, and it felt so good. Like before, I'm now actually been in a relationship for 3 years and in a happy, lifting, stable relationship. But before that, I was single for 2 years, and it felt so good to realize that I don't need a guy and physical touch to have my oxytocin levels in place. Because that had been the story I had been telling myself like 10 years ago.
And I think what you said that was really interesting before was actually the importance of boredom and actually allowing yourself, because I am one of those people, you know, yesterday afternoon I was here and I was, you know, something had been cancelled and I was, oh my God, I've got to go and do something. I've got to either move, I've got to go write something, I've got to do some research for another guest, I've got to write some, you know, whatever it is. And it's actually that ability to just be like, you know, actually I'm just going to sit and I'm just going to be, because as you say also, it attracts a very, very different energy from other people, and you're a very different person. Those people that you come across in life and you just sense that in a sense of calm and their sense of peace and self. And I think that's a very attractive quality to possess, and not many of us have mastered it.
Yeah, no, and you're so right. And if you actually think about that 30-day cold turkey thing, so that's actually a great thing to start. It's kind of actually a good idea. I wasn't thinking about it before, but also apply that to boredom. That if you think that you try to spend 30 days without not all the time doing something.
Yeah, no.
Because, you know, most of us are very addicted to the cocktail of stress hormones. So, for example, I come from a family, I think it's also because in Finland we have the war trauma. So I kind of now looking back, I understand my mom, because my grandfather, he went to the war and he was very intelligent and very successful, but also traumatized by the war. So he would drink a lot and kind of I never met him, but the stories I've told, so kind of like be super loving and amazing and then totally kind of drink and be aggressive and all that. So my mother most likely was raised by lots of stress hormones. So that became her normal. So she was always doing something. Like I think she was never without, you know, doing stuff. So, and I was then raised in that kind of environment where, for example, we got always doing stuff like very quickly was like efficient. So I was a sprinter, and I was like, I'm still the fastest cook you can find. Like, I'm not the best, but I'm the fastest. And that I thought that, you know, that's the goal. So it was so difficult to kind of unlearn to be efficient and just to be like, yeah, you know, I'm enough like this, and I don't have to do everything, and I don't have to do it quickly, and I can, you know, take more time and just enjoy life.
Sorry, I've got a quote in my throat. Yeah. I love what you say, because I think it's so apt about people in relationships. There's often one dopamine seeker, and then there's often one serotonin seeker. Will you just elaborate a bit on that and explain to our audience what that means?
Yeah. Well, actually often like dopamine driven or dopamine dominant people love to hang out with similar people. So dopamine highs, like if I take a look at my friends, they're all dopamine highs. And actually all my I think my boyfriends, so most of them have been pretty dopamine high as well. But the thing is that if you wonder that, well, how do I know? It's like when you go to airport, do you want to be there 3 hours before, 2 hours before, kind of make sure that, you know, you're the first standing in a line? Or are you the one who's still like looking for magazines and perfumes, like when you should be already boarding? So I don't know, which one are you?
I'm definitely the latter.
Yeah, me too.
If I have time to spare at an airport, it's wasted time in my opinion.
And so the serotonin dominant people, they always want to be in time because it's safety and security. And let's say that if you would be investing your money, so the dopamine highs, they love like kind of high risk, high reward stocks. As the serotonin, they would go to some safe fund. So in a nutshell, I actually do have this test. I don't know, probably it will be on my website when this comes out, where you can actually test which one you are. It's a very easy, simple test.
Awesome. And finally, why is loneliness, which is something that we're really seeing a huge rise of, sadly, why is it such a silent killer?
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about oxytocin, and I told how, for example, trauma or chronic stress affects our oxytocin levels. So the baseline decreases, which means that we have harder time connecting with other people and trusting other people. We start feeling more easily isolated. And I think that's kind of the one root cause of this epidemic. The other thing is that we're spending so much time in social media. Social media gives us all these huge spikes of dopamine because there's new information all the time. It gives this fast serotonin because there's like fake acceptance and likes. Ooh, feels good, I'm accepted. But there's no oxytocin. So basically it really takes the balance off, and that's kind of sad. So basically what we should do is spend less time in social media and really kind of embracing life, like real connections, and doing the work that we've been talking, that we are actually able to do that. Because I know how hard that is when you're unbalanced, because then when you enter a space and you're almost having a panic attack just seeing people, so it's not easy. So that then you have to kind of deal with that first to be able then to connect. But also what I'm noticing is that once you get back to your path, and as you also mentioned that when you were doing these retreats, you realized that you have grown out from some relationships. So I feel that the closer we become to our true selves, the better the people that are supposed to find us will find us. Mm. So I think also that goes to work stuff, that went to everything. And, I'm definitely not that, because I'm most of the time all over the place. But sometimes I feel that I get there and it feels so good.
Mm-hmm. Emilia, I could go on talking to you for hours. Your wisdom is just so profound, and everything you've said is just utterly fascinating. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do a take 2 further down the line when you're next in London. But thank you for your time, and I know listeners are going to find this incredibly insightful and fascinating.
Thank you so much.